They put 96 homes on my land, and I let them finish every last driveway and deck. Then I walked into court, pulled the deed like a lever, and watched the town remember what a boundary really is. My name's Caleb Hart. Folks around here call me Hart like they're reading it off a seed cap. I'm 48 in third generation. On a piece of Kansas prairie the wind keeps honest. My grandfather scraped the first lane across broom sedge with farmel that coughed more than it ran. My dad fenced it with hedge posts he cut himself, sank each one in a hole he dug with shovel, spit in the dirt, and said, "It's ours when we care for it, not when we brag about it." I learned to drive in a hayfield, learned to miss what needed missing from a man who could look a mile away and tell you the way of the clouds. When he got sick, I learned to swallow bad news like thick coffee. Hot, bitter, necessary. I lost my wife, Erin, to a winter that wouldn't quit. Pneumonia on the back end of a flu that started like any other and ended where you don't come back from. She was the kind that made a room warmer without touching a thermostat. We scattered her ashes under 3 cottonwoods by the creek because she said that's where the wind sounded like forgiveness. Our boy, Owen, was 12 then. He didn't cry the way TV says boys cry. He got quiet and started fixing things. A hinge, the latch on the chicken coop, a speaker in the truck that buzzed in Garth Brooks songs. The land kept me upright because it didn't care whether I was sad. Fences break whether or not you're ready. Cows calve on the coldest night because there's a spite in livestock you only respect after you live through it. When the subdivision folks came sniffing around, I figured it was a matter of time. The county had been talking big about growth since somebody put a craft beer tap room in the old pharmacy building. An outfit out of Wichita bought the Polk place to the east, long flat ground that held wheat most years, and put up a sign with font that made Cedar Ridge look like toothpaste. They poured roads. They planted little trees with guy wires like training wheels. And they built a model home with fake stack books and a fake bowl of lemons and a fake lifestyle. I waved at the framers when I rolled by with the seed drill. We nodded like men do when other men are earning their keep. Then Cedar Ridge went from phase 1 to phase 2, and eventually to phase 3 like a fever. And the HOA came into being right on schedule. A baby bore a manager in town who answered emails with phrases like, "Per our covenants." I don't hate HOAs. I hate people using paper to stand where they wouldn't dare stand in person. There's a difference. The first letter came in May. Thick stock. Cedar Ridge Homeowners Association across the top. Notice of violation. Unauthorized entry upon common greenbelt. There was a photo of me on a 4-wheeler, spraying thistle on the hedgerow like I have every spring since there was a hedgerow. They circled me in red like I was a coyote in a scope. The fine was $300 and a threat of further action, including law enforcement. I brought the letter to the kitchen table and set it by my coffee like a mouse I'd caught. Owen read it and blew air out his nose. "Do they not know who we are?" he said. "They don't know where their map ends." I said, "It says right here." He tapped. "Cedar Ridge Greenbelt." "It says it on their side." I said, "On ours it still says Hart." Their side had a walking path that ended against my fence. They'd hung a little gate there, a cute black iron thing with a sign that said residents only, one Saturday. I found that gate on my ground, pushed into the hedge like a drunk guest who found the wrong hallway at a wedding. I set it back on their side, rewired the fence, and left a note with a smiley face drawn the way a man who can't draw smiles draws one. Fence lines are the original HOA. The board president was a man named Trevor. He wore polos in January and had the smile of somebody who thinks charm is a job skill. We met at the model home that smelled like cinnamon and paint. He offered me lemon water, which I declined because God made coffee for a reason. He said, "We understand you feel a connection to the Greenbelt." "It's not a feeling," I said. "It's a deed." He smiled wider, like I told a joke I didn't know was funny. "Well, our survey of record shows." "Your survey of record isn't your title," I said. "Surveys draw. Deeds assign. Which one did your developer actually get?" His smile twitched. He asked if I'd like to appeal my violation. I told him I was appealing it right now by standing here breathing air and telling him no. He said I had 3 minutes at the next board meeting. I told him time was an invention I didn't accept in that context. We left it there. If you're expecting me to describe a single moment where everything turned, I can't. It came as drips, as annoyances that add up to a bucket you finally kick. They trenched a drain and cut my tile, then swore they hadn't. They set 10 feet of playground mulch against my fence and wondered why it killed the line. I caught a little boy with a fishing pole crying by the creek because a man in a Cedar Ridge polo had yelled at him for poaching HOA wildlife, which is a phrase that can only exist in a place that has forgotten what a creek is. The day a subcontractor cut down the old hedge maple at the corner, one dad and I had hung the first strand of barb on when I was trying to be 7 feet tall and failing, was the day the promise set its hook. He said his plans called for a site clearance. I said my plans call for a world with fewer idiots and more maps. He shrugged. He shouldn't have shrugged. He should have put the chainsaw down and gone to get a supervisor who had the old knowledge. He didn't. He cut, and I went inside and took the framed deed down from the wall. I've looked at that deed more times than I've looked at my own face. Patent from the United States, 1911, a line drawing a township 12 south, range 3 east, sections laid out like a checkerboard God flattened with his hand. My parcel was the east half of the southeast quarter of section 22 and the west half of the southwest quarter of section 23. Together a shape that made a kind of right angle you could recognize from a low-flying Cessna. The boundary that mattered ran along the center line of the vacated County Road 98 as platted in 1927 and vacated per Resolution 87 to 14 recorded at Book 239, page 65. That center line didn't move just because a developer shifted the road 20 yards south when they were pouring cul-de-sacs called things like Bluebird Lane. On paper, a thing stays where you put it until paper says different. That's the law. It's also common sense to anybody who's ever checked a calendar. The developer's survey had used the north edge of asphalt as built as a working line. Working lines are fine for stakes. They're not fine for deeds. Somewhere between phase 2 and 3. They platted a green belt and bulbed a cul-de-sac right over the old road's center line, like a hen sitting on a nest she didn't lay. 96 lots backed that green belt. 96 families cooked on grills and planted lilac bushes and yelled at dogs there. 96 sets of parents bragged about their square footage over beer and driveways. Most of them were good folks. A few of them thought the HOA badge made them a sheriff. It didn't. I went to the county. The recorder's office still had the same lady, Stella, who can dip Copenhagen and file an instrument simultaneously without getting either wrong. I asked for the Polk deed, the Polk to developer warranty, the developer to Cedar Ridge plat, the road vacation book, and anything with centerline and section 2223 in it. Stella pulled folios and smiled at me with the corner of her mouth like we had a secret. "Been waiting for you to come in," she said. "You were either gonna or you weren't." We spread paper on a table that had held all our town's marriages and divorces like an altar. The Polk deed was clean for his side, but it stopped at the vacated road. The developer deed said to the center line. The plat said to the north edge of pavement. The road vacation said center line remains a boundary in perpetuity. The developer had filed an affidavit correction on phase 1 to fix a radius. They had not corrected the boundary. They had a surveyor's seal. They did not have my signature. That's not how real estate grows. It's not like lichen. It doesn't spread because it's moist and hopeful. You need an instrument. They never had one. I took copies home and laid them out on the kitchen table. Owen did his homework on the other end, like a man twice his age, because in my house we live in the same room on purpose. My closest neighbor, a retired title examiner named Ruth, who treats paper like a garden she weeds daily, came over with her reading glasses on a string. She traced the lines with me, and we drank coffee that had flowed a horseshoe. "If you go in hot," she said, "you'll set everyone's fear on fire. If you go in cold, you'll freeze action. You need room temperature. You need to be the one who looks like he slept. What do I ask for?" "You don't ask," she said. "You record notice of interest, and you file your quiet title. You name the developer, the HOA, and the lots that cross your line. You don't be cruel about it. You say you will license where the house is already sitting, and you'll sell the strip under fair appraisal to the title insurer that will eventually beg you to take their money. I made a joke about how insurers don't beg. She said, they do when it's their job to pay. I hired an attorney named Louise Blackwell, who talks soft and kills hard. She grew up on a farm and puts her hair in a bun like it's a tool, not a fashion. She filed a quiet title action and stapled on a lease pendants that wrapped around 96 legal descriptions like a loving snake. Closings halted. Refinances died. Realtors call me everything but my name on Facebook, which is the same as a prayer, just to a different God. The HOA hired a firm from the city. They filed a motion for a temporary restraining order saying my notice was slander title and that I was extorting families. They asked for fees like I'd stolen Christmas. Louise responded with a calm affidavit and an exhibit list that read like a Western: patent, road vacation, deed, plat, affidavit correction, survey overlay, and my favorite, a stormwater maintenance agreement where the developer promised the city to maintain facilities located on private land of the undersigned owner, Hart. They borrowed my last name and forgot to hide the evidence. At the preliminary hearing, the courtroom smelled like dust and toner. The judge was a big man with forearms like fence rails and the face of someone who's watched people be people for a living and still hasn't given up. The HOA's lawyer, sharp suit, shoes you could shave in, talked about harmed homeowners. He gestured like bad weather. He waved a certified plat. He used words like vested in equity, the way a man uses a bat indoors. Louise stood like a maple in wind. She spoke like breakfast. Your Honor, nobody is being displaced today, she said. My client has offered licenses for existing improvements and sale of subsurface strips at fair appraised value paid by the proper party, the title insurer and the developer's bond. What we have is a developer who built past his deed and an HOA trying to enforce rules where there's no ground to stand on. Literally. The judge turned to me. Mr. Hart, you got something to say? I walked up with a folder that had been in Dad's desk before it was mine. I opened it and slid out a copy of the patent and a certified copy of the road vacation resolution. The patent was a black and white thing from before people thought fonts had feelings. The resolution was county paper with a ribbon on it because they used to do that and sometimes ceremony matters. I set both on the rail. My granddad stood on this ground when the county moved that road. I said, he helped them. He grinned about it. They promised him the line wouldn't move. They wrote the promise down. I'm not here to hurt anybody. I'm here to stand where he stood and say this is a line. The HOA's lawyer scoffed. Louise slid the developer's stormwater agreement onto the pile. The judge raised an eyebrow. That your signature, Mr. Hart? No, sir. I said, that's the developer using my name on a form. They didn't expect anyone to read. The judge took off his glasses like a man who wants 1 minute with his own eyes. He looked at the plat, the deed, the vacation, the agreement. He looked at me and then at the room packed full of people who wanted a direction more than they wanted a win. Temporary restraining order denied, he said. Lease pending stays. Counsel, I suggest you have a conversation with the title insurer and your surety. We will not be deciding this case on the backs of families in the pews. We will decide it on paper. The right paper. There's a sound a room makes when a tide reverses. It's not a cheer. You won't hear it if you're listening for fireworks. It's quieter, like gravel under a slow tire. The HOA lawyer's jaw got tight. Louise wrote something down and slid it to me. It said, they'll call. They did. Not the HOA. The title company. A man named Randall with the voice of someone who keeps Tums at his desk. He said phrases like exposure and global resolution and mitigation. He said, what will it take? Louise did the talking. Licenses for decks and fences where families already lived. A sale of the Greenbelt Strip to the title insurer at appraised value. Then a transfer to the HOA so kids could still ride bikes and people could still tell their friends they had access to a thing called a Greenbelt without knowing what it was. Payment for the hedge maple they cut, not at value but at worth, which is a price you only know if you've sat under a tree with your father. Reimbursement for the tile they severed. And because I'm not a saint, a buyout of construction easements they've been using without paying me retroactive with interest. Randall said, "We'll need to see your math." Louise said, "You'll see our math when we see your checkbook." Meanwhile, Cedar Ridge roiled. Trevor posted a breathless update about unprecedented assault and our way of life. Ms. Alma from Lot 7, who brings deviled eggs to church functions like it's a sacrament, called him a dramatic skunk in the comments. A dad named Marcus from Lot 94, who worked night shifts at the plant, wrote me a message at 3 a.m. saying he was scared his kids would lose the backyard he just hung a swing in. I told him we weren't taking backyards. We were taking back paper. There's a difference. He said, "I don't know the difference." I said, "You're going to, and you're going to be okay." My allies showed up not like a parade, but like a quiet, steady rain that fills a stock tank, without anybody noticing until the cattle looked surprised. Ruth kept feeding Louise little pieces of history that matter in court. A surveyor named Harlan, who's been finding pins since before GPS was a rumor, took his prism and shot the line of the old road center like it was a ghost he could still see. He found 2 original irons sunk in concrete by my granddad in the county when they vacated the road. He took pictures and signed his name to his map with a hand that didn't shake. The city engineer produced a pre-annexation agreement that said any greenbelt would be wholly within developer-held land. That sentence was a key and a lock. Funny how many doors paper can open if you let it. The developer wasn't exactly alive. Their LLC had been dissolved and resurrected like an inconvenient zombie more than once. We found their surety, the company that wrote their performance bond. Sureties have a language they speak in back offices directly to lawyers. They spoke it to Louise. The room got quiet again. Then there were numbers. I won't pretend I didn't feel something when Louise slid a pad across the table with a figure on it that started with a 9 and had a comma followed by more digits than I ever expected to see pointed at me. I thought of Aaron's laugh. I thought of Owen's college. I thought of the cottonwoods by the creek and the price of a hedge maple that isn't just a tree, but a time machine when you stand under it. We settled on a Tuesday in a conference room that looked like every conference room that's ever been built. Oblong table, bad art, carpet that hides stains. The title insurer paid for the strips under the greenbelt and under any deck or fence that crossed the old center line. They paid me for temporary construction easements they took without asking. They wrote a check for trees that can't be replaced and tile that can. They funded licenses for every homeowner whose kid would keep running laps from back door to swing set without noticing the ground had a new last name under it. The HOA got the greenbelt they'd been baking into their brochures. I got paid to sell nothing I ever meant to sell. Only air above old words and ground. I'd have let them walk on for free if they'd asked right. As part of the deal, Cedar Ridge's board resigned. A retired teacher named Beth took the president's chair. She doesn't smile unless she means it. She's the kind to ask, why, twice, and then look it up. She came to my porch with a pie because she didn't know what else to bring and said, "I wasn't on the board. I'm on the hook now." I said, "Good. Hooks hold things." We signed a long-term maintenance agreement that said they would mow their greenbelt and I would graze mine, and neither of us would lecture the other if the son did something to grass we hadn't planned on. At the final hearing, the judge read the stipulation into the record, stamped my quiet title, and said, "Mr. Hart, do you have anything to add?" I stood up and told him my granddad's line about caring being owning. The judge looked at the room, at 96 households worth of relief and embarrassment, and the particular kind of tired that comes from proving something you knew in your bones. He said, "In all my years, I've never seen somebody let them finish before clearing his throat. That took patience or something a lot like it." I said, "You can't fix a fence while somebody's trying to go through it hot. You wait until the cattle settle, then you close the gap. After, Trevor found me by the soda machine and did his best to be a human again. He said, 'You made me look stupid.' I said, 'The paper did. I just read it out loud.' He said, 'We should have asked.' I said, 'I was waiting for you to.' Those 96 families didn't move. They planted mums and took Christmas photos and learned to wave to me when I rode by. Marcus's kids kept swinging. Ms. Alma brought me deviled eggs with paprika like confetti on them and said, 'You handled that like soup. Slow.' The The HOA took down a sign that said residents only and replaced it with one that said be decent. Somebody nailed it crooked. It was perfect. With the settlement, I set up the Aaron Hart Prairie Fund. It pays for kids from any side of the fence who want to study nursing, welding, or water. The first scholarship went to a girl from Lot 12 who watched her mom pull double shifts through the whole mess and decided she liked the way competence looks. Owen and I replaced a hedge maple with 2 bur oaks, because if you're going to plant in Kansas, you might as well give the wind something to respect. We put a little brass tag at the base with Erin's name and the dates the world got to have her. Folks still argue. There's a woman in Cedar Ridge who writes paragraphs about goose poop like it's a moral failing. There's a guy who thinks fireworks are a birthright. Some days I open the fence for Beth's crew because a mower belt snapped and their guy can't get around. Some nights I see porch lights glowing across a green belt that isn't mine anymore and never was in the way they wanted it to be. It's there's now the right way, paid for by the people who owe, protected by the people who care. I kept one thing that doesn't show up on any plat. The line in my head that says patience is not weakness. It's aim. Let them finish if you can. Let them prove who they are on their own time. Then bring the paper. Not to crush, if you can help it, but to correct. There's a difference. We live in the space those differences make. Sometimes, after chores and before bed, I walk down a creek where the cottonwoods talk like old friends and the frogs count their blessings out loud. I think about the day I slid that deed across the rail and how a single sheet of paper can make a room go quiet. I think about Aaron saying, be kind if you can, be clear if you can't, and how that's really the only law worth memorizing besides gravity. I think about my dad saying, care for it and it's yours, and how that's true of land and people both. They put 96 homes on my land. I let them finish. Then I pulled the deed in court and watched the truth take its seat. I didn't kick a single door. I didn't swing a single fist. I just opened a folder my granddad could have opened and spoke slow. The line held. The town learned. And for the first time in a long time, I slept like a fence post buried deep, straight, and right where it's supposed to be. If you want a lesson from a man whose hands can still smell creosote, it's this. Don't confuse a loud plat with a good deed. A boundary is only as real as the people who honor it. And if they won't, you honor it for them, with patience, with paper, with a steady voice in a room that's waiting for somebody to talk like the ground matters. I thought the judge's stamp would pour concrete on the whole thing. But all it really did was change the kind of problems that walked up my drive. A week after the quiet title order, the county assessor sent Beth a letter with polite teeth asking whether the common area formerly mapped across a vacated road remains contiguous. That's bureaucrat for, did your fancy brochure match the deeds? Beth brought the letter to my porch in a manila folder and the face of a woman who expects homework. I set coffee in front of her and slid over the certified judgment, Harlan's overlay, and the road vacation resolution with its ribbon like a parade that doesn't march anymore. She read, nodded once, and said, we'll do this in daylight. We stood in front of the Board of Equalization a week later under fluorescent lights that made everybody look half sincere. The county guy read from a spreadsheet about amenity adjacency premiums. Beth spoke teacher plain. The HOA owned a true greenbelt now, paid for the right way. The rest, the sliver the developer pretended to own, never existed on paper. I took my turn and said the line didn't move. We just found it, and the numbers ought to follow. It wasn't a fight. It was a correction. They lowered valuations where the phantom amenity had been doing push-ups. A few people got refunds big enough to fix porch steps or buy a winter coat that didn't leak. Marcus texted me a picture of his adjustment with a thank you that read like a man who finally exhaled after a long swim. That same month, the city engineer, Kelly, sent word that Cedar Ridge's stormwater plan had been written for a world where grass is carpet and rain is polite. The first real gully washer would have found basements the way a raccoon finds sweet corn. The developer had promised attention in the greenbelt, which, thanks to the settlement, actually belonged to someone now. Beth asked if I'd help figure a fix that didn't chew my pasture to bone. We walked the greenbelt with stakes and a tape, while kids on scooters orbited us like little moons. Kelly talked in grades. I talked in dirt. We marked shallow swales that would hold water long enough to let it think. rehearsed the path the drop might take if it were mean, and set 3 infiltration basins where the old road centerline dipped. I donated seed from the back of my barn, little blue stem, side oats grama, switch. The HOA hired a crew to scrape and build, and I brought Owen down with a broadcaster, and that steady way, he does a job like it's a song he's memorized. For a week, the greenbelt looked like a patchwork surgery. Then it rained just enough to wake seeds and not enough to test our work. Sprigs of native came up shy and then bold. The HOA replaced 3 beds of thirsty imported shrubs with prairie drop seed that smelled like warm popcorn in August. The guy 2 doors down from Marcus said it looked messy. 2 months later, Kelly came by with a clipboard and a grin and said the runoff left the neighborhood 27 minutes later than it used to and half as angry. People who'd never said infiltration out loud were suddenly proud they had it. Beth penciled Native Plant Day in the newsletter and spelled blue stem right. That felt like a civic holiday. Somewhere in the middle of that, Trevor sent a note through Beth. He wanted to clear the air. I met him on the old roadbed, now a swale with dragonflies stitching blue thread through the heat. He said, I got out over my skis. I said, you were skiing on gravel. He laughed for the first time like a person and asked if there was anything he could do. I pointed at a pallet of coir logs and the creek bank where the kids cut down to fish. He spent a Saturday sinking fiber and learning what a mallet does to your shoulders. I didn't forgive him in a ceremony. I just watched him sweat and thought about how most of us are better as laborers than as actors. By early fall, I took the money from the insurer and the retro easements and wrote 2 checks. One to pay off the last debt that clicked in my head at night, one to the Aaron Hart Prairie Fund. I told Beth the fund would match any HOA budget line for native conversions, up to a cap that made her eyebrows go up and down twice. She said, you aren't doing this to make a point? I said, I am the point. The land is the sentence. We put a little brass tag in a greenbelt where the swale makes a lazy S, Aaron's Bend. I didn't cry. I'm not made of water. But for about a minute, I remembered how Aaron would wrinkle her nose when she was pleased, and I had to look away like the sun got too close. The fire came in October the way fires do here, out of a flat horizon with wind hitched to its back. Lightning took a bite out of a ditch full of thatch out past Section 21, and a red flag day did the rest. The volunteer department paged out around 2 in the afternoon. I heard the tone, grabbed the slip tank, and told Owen to roll the disc to the north fence. Beth called from the school pickup line saying there was smoke behind lots 89 through 96. Kelly's voice came tinny from a radio tucked in my coat. We're staging at the old road. Keep it clean. I topped off the tender, dumped a pile of dirt at the head of the swale out of habit, and put the tractor in gear. Fire runs uphill and with the wind, which means it runs at your mistakes. We didn't give it one. Owen cut a break along my side with the disc, metal singing like a wasp on iron. Marcus showed up in a city truck and started setting garden hoses like limp snakes wherever somebody's spigot would give. A few of the Cedar Ridge teenagers who were earbuds as if. Their organs hauled wet burlap and smudged faces into tiger stripes in 5 minutes. Trevor arrived sweating, leaf blower slung, looking like a man who wanted very much to be part of something useful. I pointed him to the greenbelt and didn't say a word. The fire hit the first swale and paused like it had to think. Flame hates decisions. It whimpered, went sideways, ate mulch we'd taken out last week, thought again, and met a line of wet prairie that refused to panic. The first brush truck skated in on its own dust and laid a wet line on the far edge, while a second unit backed into the cul-de-sac and did the dance where you have to both be brave and keep your wits. We caught a strip that jumped the path with flat shovels and 2 swats from a dripping gunny sack, like the oldest trick you teach a child. By the time the wind shifted, the front had a new shape, a smaller one. You could hear the sound of the room changing again. Only this time the room was 100 acres, and the sound was breath returning to lungs. The chief, a woman who looks like she's been in more kitchen table arguments than burning rooms, and won both, walked the edge with me and said, "Your swales bought us 15 minutes. I said, 15 minutes is a life, and watched the fox bolt across black and disappear into gold with a flame hadn't chewed. We set a cold trail, tucked in the corners, and drank water until our hands stopped shaking. That night, Beth sent a message saying she wanted to do it again, but on purpose. The county extension agent, a man who talks about fire like a librarian talks about books, agreed to host a learn and burn come spring. We'd cut lines, prep fuel, and light backing fires slow under watch. Teach a neighborhood that grew up with candles in jars and scented wax what a real control flame looks like and why the prairie needs it. We put on the calendar with rain dates and rules and 3 different phone numbers to call before anybody struck anything. On the Saturday we picked, the wind was right and the humidity was like a handshake. The crew circled up, cowboys, engineers, moms in leather gloves, teenagers passing drip torches like they were born knowing not to tip them too far. The chief gave a talk in plain words. The extension guy added science to it. And then we walked the black line into being. Fire crawled the way we asked it to, ate old thatch, left clean mineral soil like a promise. I watched Marcus's kids count grasshoppers and clap at the crackle. I watched Trevor volunteer for the dirty job of mop-up and do it well. I watched Owen keep an eye on a spot that could have kicked and didn't. When it was done, the smoke lifted in blue muslin sheets and the prairie lay behind it like a bed made by a careful hand. We set a post at Aaron's Bend with a small metal plate. The old road ran here. The new green runs here. Kept by the people who live on both sides. And I tightened the bolts the way you tighten a collar on a good dog. Beth read the words out loud. Not because she had to, but because sometimes you need to hear a sentence find air. Folks still argue they will forever. Somebody on the neighborhood app wants to ticket geese. Somebody thinks the green belt ought to have fairy lights year-round. Somebody else sprays for dandelions like it's a vendetta. But I've seen Trevor blow leaves in the right direction without being told. I've seen Marcus carry a hose to someone else's spigot as if it were his. I've seen Beth put a kid's drawing of a prairie on the front of the newsletter instead of a stock photo of a front door with a wreath. On my side, the bur oaks we planted the day the checks cleared have put on a ring and don't seem bothered by the wind anymore. When the sun drops, I walk the line with my hand on the top wire, feeling the way a fence hums when it's strung right. Sometimes I stop at that little plate and read those words again in my head and hear Aaron's voice say, "Be clear if you can't be kind." Then I look out over a world that learned the difference between a plat and a promise, and I let the quiet come all the way in. Patience isn't doing nothing. It's steering. Boundaries aren't walls. They're places to shake hands. And when hands meet where the paper says they should, the